I am writing this because I have no other way of making sense of what happened, and because I need to get it out before I start to convince myself it was all in my head. It was not in my head. I know it wasn't. I can still hear it sometimes in the quiet moments, like the sound is just waiting for me to listen again. It started when I moved into the basement apartment. It was not my first choice. I had been evicted from my old place after my landlord sold the building, and with barely 2 weeks to find something else, I took what I could afford. The ad said cozy basement unit with private entrance and newly renovated kitchen. I didn't care about cozy or renovated. I cared about cheap and available immediately. When I first walked in, it smelled faintly of damp concrete, the kind of smell that never goes away no matter how much air freshener you use. The landlord, a middle-aged woman named Helen, gave me the quick tour. Kitchen to the right, small living area, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom at the end of the narrow hall. The ceiling was low and painted a yellowish white that reminded me of cigarette smoke stains. The bathroom was small but functional. Sink, toilet, shower stall. And in the corner behind the toilet was a thick metal grate bolted into the wall. Helen noticed me looking at it and said, "Oh, that's just access to the sewage pipes. Nothing you need to worry about." I figured it was some kind of maintenance thing and didn't think much of it. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked my boxes, set up my bed, and tried to ignore the fact that I could hear every footstep of the people upstairs. It was like they were walking on my ceiling. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and let the hum of the refrigerator lull me to sleep. The second night was when I heard it for the first time. I had just gotten into bed. My phone was charging on a nightstand, and I was scrolling through messages when I noticed something, a faint sound, almost like water running somewhere. I thought maybe the upstairs tenant was taking a shower, but then I realized the sound wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the bathroom. I got up and walked down the narrow hall. The bathroom door was half open, and the dim light from the street lamp outside spilled in through the small frosted window. I stepped inside. The sound was louder here. It was coming from the grate. It wasn't water. It was a voice. Not clear words at first, just a low, muffled murmur, like someone speaking through layers of metal and concrete. I leaned closer, trying to make it out. My skin prickled. It was definitely a human voice. Deep, slow, almost like a chant. I froze. The air coming from the grate was damp and smelled faintly of rot. My first thought was that maybe there was a maintenance worker in the pipe somehow, which made no sense at that hour. I whispered hello into the grate before I could think better of it. The murmuring stopped. I felt my chest tighten. I stayed there for what felt like a full minute, staring at the dark metal grid. Then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, the voice whispered something back. It sounded like my name. I didn't sleep that night. I left the bathroom light on and sat in bed, trying to convince myself I had misheard it, that it had been some weird echo from the building's plumbing. But deep down, I knew I had heard my name. The next day, I brought it up to Helen casually. She laughed and said, "Oh, you're probably just hearing water rushing through the pipes. Old buildings make all kinds of weird noises." That night, I decided I wasn't going to engage with it. I shut the bathroom door and left the fan running to mask the sound. It didn't help. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sharp tapping sound. Not the kind of random knocks pipes make when expanding, but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I followed the sound. It was coming from the bathroom again. When I opened the door, the tapping stopped, but the voice started. This time it was clearer. It said, "I can see you." I remember my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I backed out of the room and slammed the door. For the next 3 nights, I slept with the bathroom door shut and music playing to drown out any sound. But on the 5th night, I woke to find the bathroom door open. I know I closed it. I remember twisting the knob and hearing the click. The smell hit me first, wet, rotting sewage, strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, not a whisper this time, a low, rasping laugh, coming from deep inside the pipe. And beneath the laugh, something moving, something wet, something dragging itself closer. I stood frozen in the hall until the voice spoke again, calm and deliberate. It said you shouldn't have answered me. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on until the sky turned pale. But I knew I had made a mistake. Whatever was down there knew me now, and it wasn't going to stop. I didn't want to go back into the bathroom that night. Every time I stepped inside the damp-smelling space, I felt my skin prickling like a warning was running through my nerves before my mind could catch up. Still, nature has a way of ignoring fear. So sometime around midnight, I found myself pushing open the bathroom door again and switching on the dull yellow bulb. The pipe looked the same rust flecks along its rim, greenish crust at the joint where it met the wall, but there was something else now, a faint dripping sound. It wasn't the steady tap of a leaky faucet. It was irregular, with long silences between drip, then nothing for what felt like minutes. Then another drip, like something viscous and slow was falling into water somewhere far below. I stood there barefoot on the cold tile, straining to hear if the whisper would come back, and it did. Not loud, not urgent, but steady muffled syllables in a low rasp, as though the voice was speaking from behind a wall of water. I crouched slowly until my ear hovered just above the pipe, opening. The air coming from inside was cooler than the bathroom. That smell again, not sewage, not exactly decay. It was like wet soil that had been closed away for decades, mixed with a faint sourness. But under it all, the ghost of something sweet, like flowers long dead. The voice shifted, rising slightly in tone, and for a moment I thought I heard my own name. I jerked back so fast I nearly slipped on the tiles. The whisper stopped immediately, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound, like the voice had been keeping something at bay. And now that it was gone, I was alone with the thing that watched from the dark hole. I tried to laugh at myself, even muttered out loud that I was being stupid, but my voice sounded too loud in that room. I turned to leave. My bare heel brushed over something that hadn't been there earlier, a thin thread of water running across the tiles from the base of the pipe toward the door. It stopped a few inches from the threshold, like it had been placed deliberately rather than flowed naturally. That night, I slept in fits. Every time I drifted close to unconsciousness, I dreamed of that pipe and the slow turning of unseen water beneath my floor. I woke at 3 a.m. to a sound that made my stomach clench, a hollow thunk from the bathroom, like metal striking metal from somewhere deep in the plumbing, and then another one slower. I stayed in bed until dawn, when I finally forced myself to check the bathroom in daylight. The first thing I noticed was that the puddle was gone, no dampness at all, but there was a small scrap of something on the tile just in front of the pipe. I knelt and picked it up. It was a fragment of old paper, soft and brittle with age, stained along the edges. It looked like it had been torn from something larger. On one side were faint printed letters, too smudged to read entirely, but one word was still legible in the center. Beneath the rest of the morning, I kept trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe some paper had been left behind during repairs and water had dislodged it. Maybe I was half asleep last night and imagine the voice. Yet every time I passed that door, I caught myself pausing just to listen. On the third day, things became harder to ignore. I had been in the kitchen washing dishes when a sharp gurgle rattled through the pipes, not the sink pipes lower deeper in the building. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds and ended with something I can only describe as a faint exhale. I stood there with wet hands dripping into the sink, listening to the way the air seemed to settle afterward. That night, I decided to test myself. I took a chair into the bathroom and sat directly in front of the pipe. I placed my phone on record and waited minutes, dragged on my back, started to ache from leaning forward, and then a faint movement of air against my ankle. I looked down and froze. A thin trickle of dirty water was slowly emerging from the pipe mouth. It wound toward my bare foot like it had direction. I kicked back and the chair scraped loud against the tile. The water stopped immediately mid-trickle. I swear I could hear something shifting deep inside, not the flow of liquid, but the slow scrape of something solid moving in darkness. When I replayed the recording later, there was a moment around the 37-minute mark where faint muffled sounds were captured, not clearly a voice, but almost like someone trying to form words underwater. There was a pause, and then an audible single tap on metal. After that, a whispering static, not from my phone. It was too organic. I told myself I'd ignore it for the rest of the week, but the following night the whisper didn't wait for me to approach. It came from under my bed. I woke up last night to the sound of water moving inside the pipe again. Not the casual trickle I've been getting used to, but something heavier, more deliberate, as if something thick was being dragged against the inner walls. My first thought was that it could be tree roots, maybe grinding in the water, or even an animal, but the sound was too rhythmic. It came in 3 slow drags, then silence, then again. Almost like breathing, if breathing could echo through steel. I couldn't help myself. I whispered into the darkness, down towards the bathroom floor where the access pipe was bolted in place. I didn't even know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. I said, barely audible, "Is anyone there?" The dragging stopped instantly. The air inside the room felt as if it had been pulled out. My ears rang with the sudden stillness. Then from deep in the pipe, I heard it again, not the same murmur as before. This time it was a distinct sound, a garbled mess of wet syllables, but they formed my name. My name. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move for what felt like minutes. Then came another sound, something like a chuckle, but it was bubbling, waterlogged. It was too wrong to be human, but too deliberate to be anything else. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every creak in the house made me jump. The bathroom door stayed shut, but I could still smell it, that faint, sour smell of stagnant sewage, but mixed with something almost sweet, like rotting fruit. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Sleep deprivation, stress from work. But the day fell off. I kept thinking I saw something from the corner of my eye, small, dark, low to the ground. In the office, my computer monitor flickered once, twice, and I swore the static lines looked like something crawling. When I got home, I found water stains spreading outward from the base of the bathroom wall, close to where the pipe runs through the foundation. It wasn't enough to pool on the floor, but enough to make the plaster bubble and discolor. The smell was stronger. I called the maintenance guy again. He came out, took one look, and said, "Yeah, this is backing up again. But I can't snake it right now. It's late. I'll come back tomorrow." I asked him if he heard anything strange when he tapped on the pipe. He laughed like I was joking, but when he actually did tap on it, his expression changed. He put his ear to the wall for a long moment. Then he just said, "That's weird." and packed up his tools. He didn't explain, didn't look me in the eye, and he didn't come back the next day. That night, I kept the lights on and avoided the bathroom, but it didn't help. Around 1 a.m., the voice came again, louder this time. It didn't just say my name. It said, "Down here." I don't know how to explain the way it sounded. It wasn't like someone talking through a pipe. It was like the words were forming inside my skull, but wet, muffled, heavy with gurgling air. It felt like the pipe wasn't a piece of plumbing anymore, but a mouth. I sat on the floor outside the bathroom for hours, knees against my chest, watching the thin line of shadow under the door. Once I thought I saw the shadow ripple, as though something moved on the other side. By dawn, the smell had gotten so bad it made my eyes water. The water stain had spread halfway across the floor tiles. And just before the sun came up, I heard scratching inside the pipe. Not dragging, not breathing, scratching. I barely slept after that night's whispering. Every sound the pipes made seemed deliberate now. It wasn't just random plumbing noises, the gurgles, the knocks, the low hums. They followed a rhythm, almost like breathing. That morning I found a new smell in the apartment. It wasn't sewage exactly, but it was foul and damp, with a strange sweet note under it, like rotting fruit left in a sealed jar. It was strongest in the bathroom, and it seemed to be coming from inside the drain itself. I poured bleach down it. The smell didn't change. I kept telling myself I was dealing with mold. Maybe something had gotten stuck in the U-bend. But there was a bigger problem. I was starting to feel watched when I was in the bathroom. Not just a vague paranoia. It felt like a steady, unblinking stare coming from directly below my feet. 2 days later, I was in the shower when I heard it again, that voice. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a low, wet murmur, too distorted to make out, but there were pauses in it, like whoever was speaking was waiting for me to respond. I froze, soap running into my eyes. The water pressure dipped for just a second, and I thought I saw something shift inside the dark circle of the drain. I leaned closer, stupidly, trying to listen. The voice went quiet. That silence was worse than the whispering. I stood there dripping, listening. Then, out of nowhere, there was a sudden metallic clang somewhere far down in the pipe, deep, echoing like something large had just hit metal. I jumped back and turned off the water. The smell got worse that night. It spread into the hallway, into the kitchen. It clung to my clothes, even after I washed them. I started noticing a thin, greasy residue on the sink drain and the edge of the tub. When I touched it, it felt cold, colder than the metal around it. I called the landlord again. This time I demanded someone come, check the pipes. He said he'd send a plumber in the morning. I barely slept, lying in bed listening to the occasional hollow tap. Tap, tap from beneath the floor. The plumber arrived around 10 a.m. the next day. He was a wiry old man with permanent black grease stains on his fingers. I told him about the smell, the noises, the voice, leaving out how much it scared me, so I wouldn't sound insane. He shrugged and said he'd seen worse, then went into the bathroom with his tools. I paced the hallway, trying not to listen too hard. After about 10 minutes, I realized it had gone completely silent in there. When I opened the door, the plumber was just staring down into the drain. His wrench was on the floor. His face was pale, eyes locked on whatever he thought he saw down there. I asked if he was okay. He didn't answer right away. Then he mumbled something about needing a different tool and quickly packed up his things. Before he left, I asked if he'd found anything. He shook his head, but wouldn't look at me. All he said was, "Don't go near that drain tonight." Then he was gone. That evening, The smell intensified until I felt like I could taste it in the back of my throat. Every time I went into the bathroom, I swore I heard faint, wet breathing coming from the pipe. I avoided going in there at all until I couldn't hold it anymore. I turned on the light, and my stomach dropped. The shower drain looked different. The metal grate was slightly pushed up from the edges, like something underneath had been pressing against it. And then, faint but undeniable, I heard my own name gurgle up through the pipe. I didn't respond. I backed out, closed the door, and shoved a towel under the crack. But as I sat in the living room, trying to convince myself it was in my head, the pipes in the walls began to knock again. Not random. For slow taps. Pause. Then 4 again. It took me a moment to realize they were keeping time with my heartbeat. I barely slept for 3 days after what happened in the basement. The voice hadn't just whispered my name this time. It screamed it. Raw, wet, guttural. And I had felt the vibration in my chest, as if the words had come from inside my ribcage. But here's the worst part. I hadn't been alone. My downstairs neighbor, Paula, had been in her kitchen directly above the pipe room. She later told me she had been washing dishes when the drain started to thump like something heavy was crawling upward. She heard the same muffled calling. She thought it was me at first, until she realized her faucet was rattling without her touching it. When she told me this, her face looked pale and oddly wet. I don't mean she was sweating. Her skin looked as though it had been pressed against damp cloth. She said she had dreams about drowning in thick, black water for 2 nights in a row. When she woke up, her pillow smelled faintly of sewage. And then, the smell came back. It was stronger than ever. Not like normal sewage anymore. Not that sharp ammonia tang. Not rotting food. This was sweeter, heavier, like rotting flowers soaked in dirty water. It filled the apartment until my eyes watered. It was worse than the bathroom, where the voice had first come through the pipe. I closed the drain, sealed the plug, even taped around it. But the smell still leaked in. By day 3, I couldn't eat. By day 5, I couldn't tell if the smell was real or just burned into my sinuses. Then the water started coming up. It began at 3:17 in the morning. I was woken by a faint, steady sound, not a drip, but a slow trickle. My bathroom light flickered as I stepped inside. The sink was fine. The toilet was fine. But the bathtub, the drain was gurgling. And from it came a thin stream of water the color of coffee, steadily filling the bottom of the tub. I crouched closer. It wasn't just water. It was thick with tiny black strands in it, like hair, but too soft. They almost looked like wet plant roots. The smell slammed into me so hard I gagged. I grabbed a bucket to scoop it out, but the second my hands touched the water, it pulsed, like something beneath had pushed upward. And then, from deep in the pipe, the voice came again. Come down. This time it didn't sound muffled. It sounded like it was just beneath my feet. The building had a basement, but the section directly under my apartment was sealed, a locked utility room. I had never been inside, but I knew that the main sewage line ran through it. I don't remember deciding to go down there. I just grabbed my flashlight and keys and walked barefoot down the creaking stairs. The smell grew thicker with every step until it felt like I was breathing something alive. The utility door wasn't locked this time. It was slightly ajar. It was pitch dark inside, the air humid and stifling. My flashlight beam landed on the massive main pipe in the center of the room. It was covered in condensation, and it was breathing, not fast, not human-like, but with a slow swell and fall. as if something was pushing from within. I thought maybe it was just the water pressure until I heard the wet sound of lips parting. "You've been listening." The voice came from the thickest part of the pipe, where a hatch-like section was bolted shut. I backed away, but the floor beneath me was wet, and my heels slid in something slick. My flashlight dipped toward it, and I froze. The floor wasn't wet from water. It was covered in a shallow pool of that same black liquid from my tub, and something was moving in it. Small pale shapes like fingertips brushing the surface. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the smell, maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the hypnotic tone of the voice, low and patient now, urging me forward. But I stepped closer and put my hands on the hatch. The bolts weren't rusted. They turned easily. As the last one came loose, the breathing stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the hatch pushed outward slightly, and the smell hit so strong that my knees buckled. My light flickered, and for half a second, I saw something inside. A mouth. Not human. Not even animal. A wet oval lined with too many teeth, receding in a blackness like a tunnel that never ended. And somewhere deep inside, something pale moved. Before I could step back, something surged from inside and latched onto my wrist. It wasn't a hand. It was soft, but with a grip like iron, and it pulled me toward the opening. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat when the voice spoke right in my ear, but not from the pipe. From inside my head. "You've already swallowed me." I was yanked forward, my shoulder scraping the hatch edge, my flashlight tumbling into the black water. The last thing I remember seeing was my own reflection in that endless wet mouth, except my reflection was smiling. I woke up in my bathtub. The water was clear. The smell was gone. My wrist was unmarked. For a second, I thought it was all some fever dream. But when I stood, my feet left faint black prints on the porcelain. And from the drain, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, came a single gurgling word. "Hungry."